This is the Construction Leading Edge podcast from constructionleadingedge.com. My name is Todd DeWalt, and it's my job to help you grow your leadership skills, grow your business, and grow your income. This is the podcast for construction business owners and leaders. And this podcast is a little different from most other episodes. This is a conversation with a guy named Spencer Fullerton. He's a podcast listener. He's in construction, and he has a really interesting background, has a unique perspective because he has been a consulting engineer, and he is now a superintendent for a contractor. And we talk about a problem that plagues a lot of construction companies and a lot of projects, and it's the adversarial relationship that tends to develop between contractors and designers, architects, engineers, consultants, MEP engineers, etc. And we talk about some questions that most contractors deal with. I've seen these problems for the last 20 years. And some of the problems we talk about are, why do so many design details seem to get missed during the design process? We also talk about what contractors can do to help solve the problem. Because here's the deal. You can either do something about it or you can complain about it. And I like to do something about it. If you've got problems, if you have an adversarial relationship with a designer on one of your projects, you can either bitch and moan about it or you can take some ownership and do something about it. So if you'd prefer to do something about it, we talk about some strategies that you can put to work for you that will help that problem. We talk about the concept of first principles. We also talk about two statements that you can make to your clients and to your designers that you work with that will build trust. So here we go. Without further ado, here's my interview with Spencer Fullerton. Enjoy. Okay, so today's podcast is going to be a little bit different. This is a working session, a conversation about a topic that every contractor, anybody who's been in the construction industry for any amount of time has dealt with, more than likely. And this stemmed from an email. I send out an email to folks who join the Construction Leading Edge Nation, and I ask, what is something that you would like to hear a podcast episode about? And Spencer Fullerton, who's from the Toronto area, responded back with a really interesting topic, and he and I have been trading some emails back and forth. And I said, this sounds like an interesting podcast conversation. So we're going to talk about that problem that, again, if you're in the construction industry, you've dealt with it. It's probably a growing problem. And before we get into that problem, Spencer, just give us a brief introduction. Tell us a little bit about your background, which is a little bit unique as a contractor, and what kind of work you do, where you're at, just a little bit of information about yourself.
Sure, no problem. I graduated from McMaster University in Hamilton with a civil engineering degree in 2006 and immediately started working as a structural engineer straight out of university, and got relatively bored with designing low-rise steel buildings quickly, so I started doing some restoration engineering and eventually wanted to start my own company, so I started my own engineering company, and then I was working 20 hours a day and burning myself out, and a gentleman who I had met through the restoration stuff owns a portion of a high-rise formwork company here in Toronto, and so it's a Verdi Alliance group of companies. He offered me a position as a general superintendent for the waterproofing division, and so I think it's been 7 years that that's been my focus, pretty much. I'm still doing that right now.
So, consulting engineer, right out of university, started your own consulting engineering business, and you went into construction. Now you're a superintendent for a waterproofing division for, you said, a high-rise concrete forming business. Is that correct?
Yes.
Gotcha. All right. And what is the problem? When I asked you, hey, what's something you want to hear a podcast episode about? What did you come back with?
The short version is I guess the problem I see now is the contractor reading construction drawings. I mainly work off of architectural drawings, but it would be the problem I see with a lot, not all projects for sure, but a lot of projects where the details on the drawings are incomplete or unclear, and it's left to the contractor to fill in the blanks or to actually provide a design for approval. And that's something I sort of thought it's taken up a lot of my time. I'm literally sitting at the computer right now trying to figure one out. And I just wasn't sure if you guys are having the same problem down in the States, if this is just me, but you seem to come back and say that it's something you've run into as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a widespread problem. I've seen it over the past 20 years from the contracting side. So we'll dig into some of the solutions, some things we can do. But given that you've been on both sides of this equation as an engineer and a contractor, talk about some of the problems that this has caused you. And let's start with your current role, but then if you could also put on your engineer hat and talk about maybe some of the problems that result from this for engineers as well.
Sure. I think as a contractor, and I've there's always the route of RFIs, I suppose, but RFIs take time, and a lot of the times with jobs, I guess legally we're held to sort of the chain of command where I'm a subcontractor, I submit to the general contractor or the prime contractor, they submit to the owner, it goes back to the consultant, and it's that roundabout way of getting there. Whereas if I could just pick up the phone and talk to the architect, who in a lot of cases I know, and just say, what did you mean here? But even that I've found when there is missing information, I have brought it to someone's attention. In some cases, they've been great, and they've come back and they said, no, we'll get on it and we'll give you something, which has been very simple for me. It took up half an hour of my day. Other times they've said, we'll draw a detail and we'll review it and approve it. Okay, so the first time I did it, great. The second time I did it, they rejected my design. And I'm sort of thinking, well, you guys weren't going to do your job. I did it for you. And suddenly it's not good enough, even though this is how the work gets done. Like I drew it because I do the work every day, and I see it done every day. This is what we're going to do. So that's when it sort of started kind of weighing on me as an issue that I couldn't quite understand how these details get missed. And for something like waterproofing, no one really cares about it until they get a leak.
Right. So
I think it falls by the wayside quite a bit. Whereas the weld design, the concrete mix, all that sort of stuff, everyone sees that and everyone puts all their effort into that. But my dad always said it's the devil's in the details. So if you take your time up front and do the details right, then it should technically be okay.
Yeah, and speaking of details, we were talking a little bit before I hit record here about something that surprised both of us when we got out of college, that as far as what engineers actually do. And so talk about your experience as a structural engineer, about who actually does the detailed design work versus what you expected it to be.
So I started working for consulting structural engineers right out of university, and I think I only got the job because the owner had gone to my university, but it doesn't really matter at this point. He told me in the interview that we design everything except the connections. So when I finally got into designing a building, my first building I ever designed was a two-story Sears building in Red Deer, Alberta. And I designed the floor beams, the roof beams, and then the columns. And that was pretty much it. I drew it all and I got rid of it. And then when the shop drawings came back to me from the steel fabricator, that's where I saw that the engineering work was. They had weld designs, bolt designs, subcritical connections, all this detailing that I had never even seen when I was at school, and I was never even asked to learn when I was just simply the consulting engineer.
Yeah, and my experience has been the same. The structural drawings that I work with, they may identify fully welded connections, moment frames, wind brace frames, things of that nature. But the detailed fabrication drawings, the number of bolts, how it actually gets built, that's all done by some detailing company that works for the structural engineering contractor. And along the same lines, maybe the theme here is that in the design world, whether it's roofing design, structural steel, whatever, as you mentioned, the devil's in the details, but those details aren't in the design documents typically. And when I say details, I'm talking about connections, steel connections, you talked about waterproofing. There are, anytime separate materials touch or you have an intersection, that's where things typically fall apart in my experience, where you have dissimilar materials coming together, you have some sort of transition, whether it's in roofing, waterproofing, windows, like a storefront system to a roofing system, siding, expansion joints. That's where things fall apart. And one reason, and let's talk about a few reasons that this happens. One reason I think is because so many of those details are either proprietary to a system, whether it's a Carlisle roofing system or some waterproofing system. Maybe they have some proprietary details, so they just say it's a function of whoever gets the roofing contract, for example. That's one reason that they don't detail it out, and they know it's going to get flushed out in the shop drawings, or there's no sense me drawing the inside corner detail because Carlisle or Firestone has their detail. We're going to see it in the shop drawings. It doesn't matter what I think. That's just, we're going to do their detail. The other one could be just because they don't know. If it's a complicated detail, they don't know how it's going to go together. If you have an intersection that includes precast concrete, metal stud framing, drywall, expansion joint, storefront framing, all those details, it's pretty complex, and it may actually be in the architect's best interest not to detail it and just leave it out, because if they draw something, then it locks them in, and they could be liable for it, whereas if they leave it vague, then it's a field coordination item. Another reason I think plans don't get detailed is because of guys like me, real estate developers and owners reps, who are pushing to get a job out on the street as quickly as possible. And what typically happens is there's some delay and on the front end, and then suddenly, well, I'll give you a prime example. I was working on it was a 140,000 square foot office building a few years ago, and it was going to seat, say, I don't know how many people, 400 people, for example. And got started with the design process. We were, say, 3 weeks away from issuing the bid documents to the contractors for bid. And the client came back and said, we need to increase the building to 160,000 square feet. Need you to redesign the entire building. And the bid date didn't change because all of these things were already set in motion because of contracts and leases and everything else. So it just got crammed. The design just got crammed. What should have been another 6 weeks of detailed design got crammed into 2 weeks, and this entire building got redesigned.
Wow.
in 2 weeks, and that does two things in my experience. One, just cramming that amount of work into that short a period of time just doesn't work. There's just not enough time to detail it out. The other thing is anytime there's rework, a redesign, it's like when you change something, it's like throwing a rock in a pond. And those ripples are ripple effects that touch things that you never imagined that it would touch. And unless you run that, like if you could somehow run a model, like if your building design was like a spreadsheet and you somehow ran this model all the way out and you could analyze everything because of the changes and flush out all the issues, then you could find them all. But that just doesn't happen because there's just not enough time. And so a lot of times these details get left out because there's just not enough time. And that's not necessarily the designer's fault, certainly not the contractor's fault. It's just the issue. So that's what I've seen. Or have you seen any other reasons that we get in this situation?
Well, there's a couple of things I'd like to touch on. The time thing, 100%. I've learned very early on that everything takes time. And so even the guys in the office, they're sitting there. A lot of the times, it used to be anyway, you're working in 2 dimensions. So it's hard to visualize what's going on. You're drawing something on a piece of paper. Well, you can't really picture the 3rd dimension. And then you've got the owner, likely they're the ones that have got the investment in it. And they want to see the return on their investment as quickly as possible. So I don't think that helps anybody, but I also don't think it's anybody's fault. It's just sort of the way things are. The industry works. When you put money down on something, you don't really see a return until your building's full and you can start charging rent or charging mortgages, whatever it is you're doing. So I don't even blame the owner for that. It's just the nature of how the business goes. The 2-dimension thing, it's starting to change with BIM. I've been on a few projects now, one in particular where we use BIM 360 on a daily basis to enter, sort of track a punch list as we go. So far, so good. But also they've got in there is kind of the 3D model of the building. And someone went to the time to kind of show how, as a general contractor who did it, they built the building in 3 dimensions. So which column first, the capitals, the drops, all that sort of stuff. And they went like east to west and back all the way across right up to the ground floor. They sat us all in a meeting, the subcontractors, and said, oh, yeah, okay, we can do that. And with the weather we've had up here, it's a bit of a challenge, but at least we could all see. And so far, I don't think there's been any of those 3-dimensional issues. They will arise, but again, that's through, I think, at this point, the experience of the subcontractors and the general contractor being able to foresee them by seeing what has been drawn in 2 dimensions on the drawing. 2 dimensions isn't the greatest way to represent a building. I used to use, a lot of people have gotten into Revit, I think, with AutoCAD. I used SolidWorks when I was designing even steel connections and even just normal buildings just to see how it would fit together. Another issue, I think, is a lot of tradesmen don't know what it means to be a consultant, and a lot of consultants, in my opinion, aren't really sure what it means to be a tradesman. So what I mean by that is my first sort of site visit as an engineer when I was 23 years old, I walked onto the job in kind of a plaid shirt, jeans, and boots. Looked like I might have known what I was doing, but wasn't sure. And I started talking to the welder. I saw him working. I, to this day, don't know how to weld. I can design whatever you want, but I can't pick up the machine and actually do it. And there's nothing, as a 23-year-old engineer, I could tell that guy about how to weld. There's also nothing he can tell me about how to size a beam. He can go on experience, but I can't just read a book and pick it up. I'm going to kill myself. So I think that sort of lack of understanding of each other's abilities and expertise may be something that we have to draw on more, because there's a lot of places you can get knowledge from. And for me, I can talk to older architects. The guy that taught me engineering, he was one of the smartest men I've ever met. His name was Vish Dekne. He's still working now. I remember one time I think he knew everything and knows everything about everything. He taught me the history of the Turkish language during a meal with a lady from Turkey. And I looked at her and she nodded along, said, yeah, he's right. And so he's got the knowledge. He's worked as a contractor, an engineer, steel detailer, everything. But now, even for me to get my professional engineering license, I was required to do, after university, 4 years of working in engineering environment. One of them had to be in a Canadian environment. The other 3 were allowed to be wherever I wanted. But there was no requirement that I actually am working on the site somewhere. So without that site experience, without seeing a building go together, experiencing the problems that arise, even just if it was for one of those 4 years, I don't have the ability to go back and put that knowledge into the design for the next time. So I think it's the same for a guy who's physically building the building. If he doesn't know the requirements of the code, building code, steel code, fabrication requirements, all the limitations that lead to that design, it could be the owner's requirements. They want this much open space, this much window space, city requirements with light or green roof, all that sort of stuff. If he's not aware of that stuff going in and understanding why the design has come to this point, then I think that disconnect is what sort of leads to, call it tension, with the lack of details or whatnot. Because like you say, maybe the details have been left out for a logical reason. They might not know. But the words, I don't know, or that was my fault, are unheard of on a construction site. So in you talking about the lean construction and whatnot, we were saying before, everyone collaborating from the start, it seems like a way to minimize these mistakes. Mistakes will 100% happen on a job. But I just think, do you think lean construction might be the way forward in learning that maybe we were going down the wrong path? Maybe we got to get everyone together first and then figure out, like you said, the right price for the job, not the best price for the job.
Yeah, 2 comments. I think there are some underlying root issues here. One of which is this, I think there's a lack of appreciation between contractors and engineers. And you said the lack of understanding. I would say there's in a lot of cases, a lack of appreciation, maybe even animosity between the two, because there's this Chinese wall between. When I started in the business, there was this adversarial relationship, 3-part adversarial relationship on a triangle: the owner, the architect / engineer, and the contractor. And typically the architect and engineer were paired with the owner against the contractor, and there was this tension, and the assumption that the other guy was always trying to screw the other one. Contractors are all evil. Contractors are trying to get paid for nothing. Contractors are thinking the architect they don't know what the hell they're doing, and there's this animosity. So there's this separation. Here's one thing I found. Anytime there's a separation between 2 groups of people, then with different roles, different interests, then animosity and dissension and speculation will abound, whether it's 2 divisions of the same company, 2 different offices in different cities of the same company. I've seen that. Contractors on the same site, whatever it is. And the solution to that is to get people together. When you eliminate that separation, you get people together, then that solves a lot of the problems. Because then they realize, that the guy that I used to call an architect or the engineer, he's not some jackass, some faceless idiot jackass who's sitting in an office somewhere. He's a real guy. He likes some of the same stuff. He seems like a reasonable guy. He has a family, and we've connected with this guy. And so, okay, he's a real guy. But as long as we are the other person is a nameless, faceless nobody that we know, then we tend to assume the worst about them, and we're not going to help them out. So that's one of the underlying issues. The other underlying issue is an overemphasis on starting things as opposed to finishing things. And I talked about this on a podcast 65, I think, a couple of podcast episodes ago. It's about left to right thinking versus right to left thinking. The typical approach with a project, and I've seen this all the time. Here's the typical approach. It is a client says, we have a business need, and let's use the example of an office building, for example. Client says, we need more seats. We need new office space. Our lease is expiring in a few years, so let's go get a price on a building. And they hurry up to try to throw something together. They want to get a price as quickly as possible and get a contractor on board because they think the most important thing is to get a price quickly and get somebody locked in. So they don't want to invest a lot of money on the design. And so maybe they try to push as much of the cost off as possible, and they want to get a contract written based on the minimal amount of information. Let's get a 60% design and get a contractor on board, and then we'll sort the rest of it out later. Not really thinking so much about the construction cost necessarily, but not even thinking about, not even giving any consideration to long-term maintenance and operational costs of their facility. Doesn't even enter their mind. That's so far to the right of the page that they're not even thinking about it. So that's left to right thinking is let's get started as quickly as possible and get to the next thing as quickly as possible. And then most of the time, by the time they get to the finish, they're not satisfied with the quality because they've had to cram workers in there, and they're not happy with the long-term efficiency of their building because all they were focused on was what was to the left of that, which was construction cost, and they're going to pay the price for the rest of the life of that building. Also along those lines, thinking left to right is when for some reason when this is a common theme that I've seen, is a client will come along and say, I have a business need. And then they come up with what they think is the solution. And then maybe they go a couple of steps down the road, and their real business need is their lease is expiring in 2 years. And then they go a few steps down the road and they say, well, that means we need to build a new building. And this building needs to be 100,000 square feet. Therefore, we need this, and they go on down the road, and then they've put together this solution that, frankly, they're probably not equipped to put together. They don't have all the right information. They don't have the right people at the table, and then they bring it to the contractor, and they put these bid documents out and say, here's what we want, and the astute contractors can look at it and say, this doesn't make sense. This is not what you need, but I have to price this to stay in the game. I'm going to give you what you ask for, even though it's not what you need. And the best way to do this, here's my advice for contractors, would be whenever someone comes to you with a proposed project, the first line of questioning would be, let's get all the way back to your business need. if you come to me with a document or a project for a 100,000 square foot building, I'm going to say, well, why do you think you need 100,000 square feet? What assumptions are you based on? And then keep working backwards until you get to their real need. And maybe they really only need enough room for 50 people, and they were based on all these crazy assumptions. And what that'll do is that'll save you a lot of time that could be wasted working on whatever they asked for, and instead go work on what they really need. So it's what I advise people is to always work from right to left, like figure out what does success look like, and then also operate from first principles, which is get to the absolute most basic fundamental needs, strip off all the assumptions, all the speculation, all the bad information, and get down to their most basic need. And then get as many people, as many smart people at the table as early as possible. So my advice for someone, if you're thinking about building a building or any kind of project, then get a contractor, get an engineer, get a site work guy. That's what I do. I will go tap people. I will get people involved and say, hey, this is what we're thinking about. It's one piece of paper for might be a $10 million project, but here's what we're thinking. What should I be concerned about? And get as much input as early as possible to avoid these layers of assumptions and bad information. So that's my rant on some advice there, and some of that goes along with lean methodologies. But what do you think are some solutions to this issue?
Well, I think if you're piling on the problem again, but one of the issues we run into up here when we do a lot of high-rise condos, the owner at the time we're building it isn't the end user. They're not the ones who get to maintain the building. Their investment lasts so long as the construction's going on. As soon as construction's done, they're not involved anymore. So I think while that happens, while someone's making money on getting something up as quickly as possible for the lowest possible price, their goal is to maximize their return. I find it hard to think that a major company is going to be more interested in the best product possible. Let's slow down, let's get this right, when they're not going to remain the end user. Right. So I think that's another issue to somehow address. I don't have all the answers, but as far as solutions go to the issue, I think you're right. The collaboration, and going back to your early episodes, the animosity that you talked about between consultants and contractors, the unresolved conflict. And unless you're in the same room, able to discuss, me being able to, for my details, when the inspector asks for this or the architect hasn't given this, the ability to just call them and explain, hey guys, I'm missing this. Do you mind if I do it this way? What I want to not have to do is get my ideas approved when nobody has told me what to do in the first place. Right? I've been approved as the applicator on this project. We know what we're doing. Our guys have done it for 30 years. So you get a warranty at the end of it. Why question the little thing that you forced me to take on? Mm-hmm. And if I could make that phone call and have that sort of understanding that the architect is not out to stop me from doing my work. I'm not out to stop the architect or take anything away from them. I screw up plenty of times during the day. And I have stopped construction meetings dead in their tracks by saying, yeah, we screwed that up. Sorry, we'll fix it. They can't yell at you anymore. They can't get mad at you. Right. You've acknowledged your faults, and you've acknowledged that you will take responsibility for it. And it really kind of throws people for a loop when you do that. There's no, I'm not asking for extra money. I'm not blaming someone. It's just a mistake happened. we're the waterproofers, we'll fix it. If you don't like what we did, then it's kind of an issue because there was no detail specifying this. It was something unforeseen. And if you want to keep your schedule, it wasn't worth a 5-day RFI here, guys. So if I can have that direct line and relationship with the designer and or the inspector, there's a lot of great inspectors out here who have asked a lot of great questions, especially lately, saying, well, are you doing this? And I look back and say, whoop, I did not even read the spec on this one. I should have. So pulled the guys off the job, came back a week later, do it right. So none of us are out to hinder the schedule in any way, but there's such a drive to get the schedule, to keep the schedule maintained or even accelerated, that I think a lot of the expectations on time become unrealistic in the sense of doing things properly, perfectly every single time, going through the RFI process, having it go up, then having to come back down, get it answered, up, back down.
Yeah,
if we can just all meet at the table one day, like you said, if I can personally know the architect, we don't have to like each other. We just have to understand this is the way it's going. It's a fast job. Can I call you? Can we check on this stuff? So maybe that's a step in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, the ever-increasing speed of projects is at odds with the old RFI process, the old RFI process. If there are, because if you have multiple layers of consultants, then it just sits in somebody's inbox. And the way we operate on our projects is we will have, especially early in the project, we'll have weekly coordination meetings, and we'll get everybody at the table. We'll have the owner, the tenant rep, all the MEP designers, especially during the design process, if we need to bring the steel guy in, if we need to bring the roofer in. And what I've found to be really successful is a couple of things. One, in these meetings, always take a posture that says you don't know everything. Mm-hmm. And because that's one way to piss somebody off, is to come in and assume you know everything. So I've received a couple of emails from some of you listeners who've said, hey, I'm about to get out of college. What's some advice for me? Here's one. Here's a good thing. When you come out, you don't know shit, all right? And you may think you do, but unless you've been on a project, spend a significant amount of time on a project, you don't know how these things go together. So take a posture of, yes, I have a college degree or whatever training you have, but you don't know everything. And all those people at the table who've been doing this for a long time, they are a great resource of information, and they would be glad, for the most part, if you take the right posture, they'll be glad to show you, and you can learn so much. You can get up the learning curve so much faster by asking questions and saying, like you said, I don't know. I love to say, here's how I like to operate. I will lay out what I've started calling the commander's intent. This is what winning looks like. All right, we've got 25 people in the room, guys. Here's what winning looks like. Overall, the project needs to be done by this date, safety, schedule, quality, all that stuff, obviously. And we break it down, and if it's at the beginning of the project, I'll say we need to have bid documents out by this date, and that's our goal. How are we going to do that? And take the posture where, I'm not going to draw anything, and I'm not going to build anything, but it's my job to manage the process. So go in with a posture of asking questions, not knowing everything. Next would be trust. To develop trust is huge, because you're not going to collaborate with anybody. Nobody's going to collaborate with you if they don't trust you, and vice versa. And there are two great phrases that will build trust. One is what you already said, which is to say, I screwed up. Mm-hmm. When you tell somebody, yeah, I messed up, we're going to take care of it, that builds trust. The other one is to say, I don't know. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how we're going to do it. That's why we're here. And then lay out what winning looks like. Don't try to micromanage the process. Don't tell people how to do their jobs. Don't be the architect who's telling Spencer how to how to do detailed waterproofing when they've never done waterproofing. Lay out the end result. Here, this is what winning looks like, and then ask people, what do you need to do this? What's it going to take? What information do you need? How much time do you need? How much money do you need? What do you need to make this happen? As opposed to telling people exactly what to do and then threatening them and then questioning them every step along the way. That just doesn't work. So if you want to get something done and somewhat enjoy the process, then lay out what winning looks like, trust people, ask a lot of questions, and then ask, how are we going to get there? To me, that's been pretty successful. What other strategies would you suggest, or suggestions would you offer, Spencer, to help facilitate this?
Something you and I sort of talked about. There's a lot of paper in construction. There's the drawings, there's the specs, there's the contracts, there's the manufacturer's details, there's this building code, there's that building code, and they're all supposed to link up. And legally, specifications supersede the drawings, which is a little weird. But I remember I'd spend 2 months on designing a building, and then my bosses, when I was engineering, would tell me, okay, now assemble these specs and send them out this afternoon. And then a year later, they told me that they supersede the drawings. Like, well, I actually sat down to read them one day, and they were outdated by years. And they contradicted themselves within the same specification section. And so that's something that I've always found sort of, it adds to the confusion. And it was my lesson that as a consultant, as an engineer, I should not allow the contractor to think. I should show him exactly at the end what needs to be there. The specification should describe it in words, and I have no right to tell him how to get there. That's what we pay him for. Mm-hmm. So if my specification in there is the execution section, which I always found a little strange because they're going to do it however they want to do it. But even when that, just again, that the contradiction between all the different construction documents, and there are so many construction documents, I've finally started sitting down to read them all word for word so I can have these discussions with architects, with inspectors, because that's what they do. They sit down, they read word for word, and the inspector actually more than the other people, I think, because in a lot of cases, because of the pressure from everyone to get this out to start, like you say, things fall by the wayside. There's a copy paste mentality that has happened, I'm sure, to all of us, and that has led to severe problems at some points. It has that potential too. So I think a little bit more care, even from a contractor in the tender stage, by they're given everything. Look at it, see where the contradictions are, see if you can figure out all this stuff before we even submit the price or as we're submitting the price. If I would like to think that an owner that sees a contractor has gone through the care of pointing out all the, not mistakes, the oversights, errors and omissions. That's why consultants have errors and omissions insurance, that sort of thing. All the little details that they may not have known about, or they intentionally left out for time reasons and left it up to the contractor. If we could address it at that stage so that it all gets sorted out in those kind of post-tender meetings and before ground gets broken kind of thing, that could save a whole lot of time going forward on the job site.
Yeah, I agree. And as an owner's rep, I can tell you, if I have a project out for bid for 3 weeks, and I typically only invite 3 or 4 bidders on these projects, and I have one guy who is proactive. They're asking questions, saying, again, not taking a posture of, hey, somebody screwed up, but it's, we saw this and wanted to make sure you understood, or we had a question about this. Your spec calls for this, but the drawings show this. What do you really want? That's adding value to me. That's helping me. And when I see someone who's taking that sort of care and looking at the important stuff, then that tells me they're really doing their due diligence. This is a pretty good indication of how they'll be on the project. Now, one piece of advice I would give to people is don't bring up details during the bid period that don't affect cost.
Right.
It doesn't matter what color the handrail is going to be painted. There may be a discrepancy between two details, but that doesn't matter. You can sort all that stuff out. So I completely agree. During the bid period, go through those documents, point out the discrepancies that will help build trust with you and your client. It's going to help you get a better number. It's going to level the playing field to make sure everybody else is pricing it the same way. And then if you're already past that stage, if you're already under contract and you just got handed a project, my advice would be on the front end, do this as early as you can, even if it's past the bid period. Do the same process. Look for value engineering opportunities, look for cost saving potentials, look for discrepancies, oversights, misses. And then if you find an architectural detail that's a little screwy, then discreetly share that with the architect. Give them a call and say, hey, I saw this. I wanted to talk to you about this. The worst thing you can do is go around them, go to the client and make the architect look bad, or go to the architect and make the owner look bad, or somebody else. Go to them. Take a team approach. It's real simple. How would you want to be treated? If the architect saw you make a mistake, would you want them to go to the owner and make a public spectacle out of it, or would you like them to come to you and share it with you so you can solve it? It's just basic. I think so much of the process gets in the way, and there are these invisible walls that we build between architect, engineer, consultant, whatever. And what if you were all on the same team? And just pretend like you all work for the same company. And how would you ask yourself, how would this work if we were all working for the same company? If we were all on the same team, how would we handle this situation? Well, you'd probably just all get around the table and you'd solve it. You wouldn't worry about trying to make somebody else look bad or yourself look good or whatever. I think it's this bureaucracy, this process that we just assume we have to follow so many times can just be abandoned, and that solves a whole lot of the problems. So let me ask you a couple of things. Let's go back to we've hammered on some of the problems. I think we've uncovered some of the reasons, the root causes of this issue. I think we've come up with some pretty good solutions here. But I want to go back to.
If I could just post one more thing in there, just because I think it's important to sort of nip in the bud. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's hard to be tactful when pointing out someone's mistake, and I think ego plays has a lot of negative connotations in this sense. It's hard for a lot of people to hear from someone, I think you might have made a mistake here. I think this is a better way to do it. It's like they're questioning your entire being.
Yeah.
Whereas, no, the point is just to do it right and to acknowledge that maybe, like you say, maybe you don't know everything. But the team approach is, for me, I don't care if I come up with a solution as long as someone does and we agree on it. It can be anybody. It doesn't really matter, but I think everyone wants to be the guy, the go-to, no, I know this. And I think it'd be important for everyone to do their best to let go of that mentality and just put the project first in terms of, no, we don't get paid if we don't do this right. So let's put that as the priority, doing it right.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Let's focus on what's right and not who's right, and not be so consumed with having to be the one that comes up with the right answer. But let's just find the right answer, even if it doesn't come out of my mouth. That's great, but the focus needs to be let's find the right solution, even if it comes from whoever it comes from. I've had great solutions come from the guy's out in the ditch.
Yep.
And yeah, but that requires putting your ego aside and saying, I don't know everything, but as Randy Hall, he's the CEO of Batts and Cook, one of the biggest builders in the Southeast. He said something that stuck with me. He said, every pair of hands comes with a free brain.
Yeah, true.
And there's this wealth of information and experience locked inside the heads of people. And one of the best ways the best way to keep it locked up is to act like you know everything. One of the best ways to unlock it is ask a lot of questions and take a posture of, I don't know everything. What do you think? And just asking great questions. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's a great point. So let's talk about advice for people coming out of college. You've got the unique experience of having been an engineer. Now you're a contractor. What are one or two key pieces of advice you would give to someone who is finishing up their college education and either trying to pick a career or whatever it is, just somebody that's, let's say they're in their senior year, their last year of college or university? What's some advice you'd give them?
I think you've been saying it the whole hour we've been talking here is you don't know everything. Engineers don't rule the world. I think, to put it nicely, just never discount where you might learn something from. Like I said, I have people that technically work for me at this company. They've been doing this for 30, 35 years. There's literally nothing I can teach them about how to do their job. And I'm technically their boss. My education provides me with no on the ground training to have done it. Like I said, I don't know how to weld. So why would I tell a welder how to do his job? I used to approach site visits the same way, where there was a site issue. I'd sit there, I'd look at it, and I'd look at the contractor and I'd say, what do you want to do? I'd let him tell me, and then I'd go do the math. If the math worked, I'd draw his solution. Because if he's suggesting it to me, that means that's probably the way to do it, and he can get it done. And by asking him his opinion, probably just made his day. At very least, you made his day easier, because you're just going to do what he wanted to do anyway. So I think the biggest mistake that anyone can make is, just like you say, assuming that you know everything. The best thing you can do is acknowledge that you know very little. Even if you have spent summers interning, or even better, if you have spent your time with your boots on the ground, maybe building a house, that sort of thing. Just keep asking questions. I'm 34 now, and I coach. I've played a lot of rugby in the past and coach now with some guys at Master University. And the three of us coaches sit down every couple of weeks and figure out, okay, what are we doing well? What do we have to do better? Where are we going to learn this stuff? Who do we ask? What do we read? And I've started bringing that approach into work as well now. We're trying to make some changes slowly, because we don't have it all figured out. There's a better way to do things out there. And even my boss, who's 51, has agreed to all this. You're right, we got to make some changes. So, like you say, free brains everywhere. Just ask some questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. It's free brains everywhere. And I think having that mindset, I was actually just talking about this to someone earlier this morning, a business owner, and having a mindset that always thinking, what if there's a better way? What if there's a better way to do this? Just how can we do this better, and not get locked into tradition, habits, bureaucracy, but maybe even ask, how would this look if it were simple? If this were easy, how would we do this? Sort of like if we took away all the titles and contracts, how would we get this building built? Mm-hmm. How would this look if it were simple, if it were easier? So Yeah, great advice. I knew this would be a good podcast, Spencer. I told you, and I was. I'm not right. I'm not right very often, but I think we nailed this one. So great stuff, man. I really appreciate you reaching out to me and for sharing this. This has been a good conversation. Hopefully, it helps people. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that? Whether it's on social media, email, whatever. If people want to dig in deeper on this, how can they get in touch with you? If so, how?
Sure, they can. Yeah, social media and I aren't the best of friends, but my email is probably the best way, and the easiest email address would be Spencer Fullerton 10, the number 10 at gmail.com. You can throw that up on the show notes if you'd like. I'm fine to continue the conversation and happy. Said if anyone has any advice or notes for me about anything, I'm happy to be all ears. And I wanted to thank you as well. I stumbled across this podcast a few months ago and kind of binged on it for the first 60 episodes or so. And it's literally been since starting the podcast that I've gone to my boss about making these changes within the company. So it's had quite an effect on me, and I was pretty taken aback to be asked to take part in it. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm glad the podcast is helpful. That's my goal, is to help us all get better. That's a big goal, but I don't know it all, and between us all, we probably can get pretty close to knowing it all. So I'm glad to hear that it's helpful. And just be warned, if you're listening to this and you send me an email on a topic, I may just ask you to come on the podcast and talk about it. So, well, great stuff, man. I appreciate it. Stay warm up there in Toronto, Spencer, and I'll have a link to the show notes and have all this other stuff when I wrap up here at the end. But thanks again, Spencer. This has been great.
Thanks, Todd. I appreciate it.
Well, there you go. Hope you enjoyed that conversation. Be sure to track Spencer down, contact him, let him know that you appreciate him taking the time to be on the podcast. If you want any of the links or notes that we talked about, you can get those at constructionleadingedge.com/069 for episode 69. And if you're a project leader and you want to take your project leadership skills to the next level, I would encourage you to check out the Project Leader Bootcamp over at constructionleadingedge.com/bootcamp. You'll learn how to plan your projects better. A lot of the strategies that Spencer and I talked about as well are in there. It is designed to help you get up the learning curve and be more effective, move up in your organization, solve bigger problems, make more money, potentially even take over the world. Not sure. It hasn't been proven yet. But if you want to get better as a project leader, project manager, superintendent, project engineer, or you want to move up into one of those spots, check out the Project Leader Bootcamp over at constructionleadingedge.com/bootcamp. If you are a construction business owner and you want to take your business to the next level, you want to improve cash flow, build a better team, inspire your folks, hire more people, scale up, get more work, sell better, then contact me about my one-on-one coaching program. Just send me an email, todd@constructionleadingedge.com. We'll set up a 30-minute free strategy call so I can learn more about your business, find out how I can help you best, and I'll tell you more about my one-on-one coaching program to help you get the results you're looking for. Don't forget, go to constructionleadingedge.com/iTunes review to see how to leave a review for the podcast. I appreciate those podcast reviews. That helps get the word out to the world about the podcast. And lastly, thanks for listening. I'm Todd DeWalt. I appreciate all the emails and reviews you're sending in, and I will talk to you next time. Thanks.